And here at the end of the road, I still have hope.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. True light, that gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me.' Out of his fullness, we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known."
Great, welcome everyone. I know that video talked a lot about light, and there's not much light outside, but hopefully the hot drink and sandwiches can brighten your day a bit. Yes, welcome to Events Week. Events Week, we run as the Christian Union every year to look at questions of faith, looking at Jesus, and uncovering big questions. And we do this because we believe that Jesus is good news for everyone. So how it works this week, there are lots of talks at lunchtimes, at dinner times, and evening it's a bit different. There's some more activities and things that you can go to and listen to and be a part of. So this week is about home. And today we're looking at the question, what human life is worth. And before we start, I'll just go through some housekeeping. So at the back to the left, there are some toilets just through the big door. And so feel free to jump out anytime. And equally, we know that there are some quite difficult topics that we may talk about and things that we may go through that may bring up emotion and thoughts. And so there is no shame in having to leave or go out the door, or there's seats at the back if you want to just listen and get involved later on throughout the lunch. Great. Yes, this is an opening. And welcome space, we'll have time for discussion after the talk, which Daniel is going to give. And I'll introduce him in a moment. Yes. So today, we're going to have a talk led by Daniel, and then a discussion, and then we're going to go into some Q&As, and there'll be a QR code which will come up on the screen where you can fill out a form to submit some questions. Great. Without further ado, I'm going to bring up Daniel, who's going to be speaking today. Thank you very much, Daniel. Please, can you introduce yourself and what your connection to Cambridge is?
Yeah, I came to Cambridge in September 2022 to start a PhD in history, which I am in the process of completing, looking at the role of public speaking in the campaign to end the slave trade. And then I also work at the Round Church, where we have a Christian Studies Center, which is an amazing place to study. We run lots of amazing events. And then I work very, very part-time with the Interparliamentary Task Force on Human Trafficking, where I get to work with MPs in any country in the world who want to fight human trafficking.
Great, thank you. And in context of today and home, where is home for you? And
well, as a proud Jonian, home is St. John's, Cambridge, but before that, home was Canada.
Nice, thank you very much. Feel free to take the stage.
Well, as a PhD student, as well as someone working in the advocacy space, fighting human trafficking, I feel sometimes I can inhabit two very different worlds. When I'm working with members of parliament, this past year I got to work with someone in Australia, a member of parliament in Sri Lanka, someone in Egypt. When I'm working with these individuals, we're dealing with these global, horrifically serious issues, trying to help them convince the fellow legislators to fight human trafficking, to care enough to put their political careers on the line so that they can make a difference for very marginalized people. And then as a PhD student, my wife and I were here. I became a PhD student because I want to become a professor who gets to work with undergrads. So my wife and I love having undergrads over for brunch. I have done the odd supervision, and getting to walk alongside undergrads is sometimes a world away from the very, very heavy world of parliamentary advocacy, where the very serious issues we work with undergrads is the stress of wanting to get a first, stressing over maybe having got a two-third, the biggest drama about someone they like not liking them back. But you mean so much to us. And my wife and I love being able to come alongside undergrads. It's really why we're here. And I find that although they're two very different worlds, some of the questions are the same. And one of those questions is the one that I've been asked to speak about today, which is, what is a human life worth? What is a human life worth? This is the question I need the members of parliament I'm working with to be able to help answer in order to help convince other politicians to join them in advocating for victims. But when we're talking with a student, it's June and they feel like they just flamed out of their exams. They're struggling with the same question. You're struggling. I'm struggling with these same questions where life is unraveling in ways we hoped it never would, and we're struggling with our sense of value and worth. We feel insecure. And so today we're going to explore what is a human life worth. One of the moments in my life where my professional work and my personal friendships kind of collided in this question was on the 26th of January 2016. I had escaped from the frigid Canadian cold of Canadian winter into my basement apartment, and as I took off my layers and layers, my coat and my toque and all that we wear in Canada on minus 20 days, I opened up my MacBook Air and stared straight into the eyes of an image I hoped to God to never see. See, 5 years before this, I'd moved into a broken, high-needs neighborhood with a team of friends to try to help people climb out of poverty. And we ran resume clinics to try to help people get jobs, and my favorite work was the after-school kids program. And of all the children we got to work, my favorite, everyone's favorite kid, was this girl named Danielle. She was 8 years old. Danielle loved the fact that we essentially have the same name, Danielle and Daniel, and she had the most sparkly eyes. Every day on her way home from school, she'd knock on my door and say, "What you doing?" And I'd come outside and we'd chat about life or anything or nothing at all. And after 5 precious years of friendship, the whole time having this fear that something would happen to her, because neighborhoods like the one I lived in are precisely the neighborhoods in Canada that predators are going into to prey on children. There I was in my basement apartment, in front of my computer, staring straight into Danielle's eyes in a missing child poster. That moment, I felt so much fear. Instantly, I called my friend Marika, who was on our team, and we headed outside back into the cold in order to look for her. We talked to the police, we talked to her mom, we're all looking for her on the streets, just spreading out over the city. And as we're looking for her, I wasn't, like, in one sense, asking the existential question, what is a girl worth? What is this little girl worth? But instinctively, our actions are answering that question. And I think that everybody in this room would want to say that Danielle is worth looking for and looking until we find her. But if we're going to be the kind of people that look until we find, if we're going to be the kind of people who can have a resilient sense of worth even when life is crumbling for ourselves, then we actually have to have a coherent answer to this question. Now, in the next slide, you can see Rachel Denhollander. She is someone who has profoundly impacted the way I answer this question. Rachel was a gymnast, and she also is a lawyer. And she, in 2018, famously came forward. She was the first person to come forward about the American Olympic gymnastics team doctor, Larry Nassar. She brought forward allegations that were confirmed in court that he had sexually abused her and more than 300 other people. I was actually in my office at Canada in Parliament when my colleagues liked having the TV, the news on playing. I find it hard to write speeches when that's happening, but anyway, they had the news playing, and all of a sudden it was her live testimony where she was sharing her victim impact statement. It's such a profound statement. We're not ready for that yet. That'll come later. But thank you. So she, in her speech, she asked the question again and again, what is a little girl worth? What is a little girl worth? And the way that she answers that, again, shaped the way I see this. And so we're going to explore that together. Now, before we get into the meat of the talk, one of the places one can go to try to find and explore this question would be the great constitutional statements we have, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, or in this case, even older, the US Declaration of Independence. I read this as a Canadian. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Now, what I find awkward about this is, I think, three things. First, in this next slide, you can see, they say it's self-evident. Now, I'm not a logician, but just stay with me for a second. If it was self-evident, they wouldn't need to say it, nor would they need to even have this Declaration of Independence. I don't think human rights are that self-evident. Second, they don't seem to have been, they don't seem to be that self-evident because throughout so much of history, and even around the world today, there are all sorts of even well-meaning people who are violating human rights. For example, the people who wrote this statement actually owned slaves, and they say that all men are created equal, and by men I think they mean humankind, but in another very real way, they're excluding women from a lot of human rights, people of color, Jewish people, indigenous people. So like Danielle, for example, as an indigenous girl, would not, like almost none of the rights they're writing would actually apply to her. So they don't seem to be that self-evident even to the people who are writing about them in beautiful ways that have beautifully impacted history. So the shape of this talk is going to be the following. First, naturalism. I'm going to argue that naturalism devalues victims. Second, the evil points to the divine. And third, that the scars of Jesus reveal humanity's infinite worth. First, back to my work in human trafficking. In my work in fighting human trafficking, I often have to read really disturbing material. And one such example is when I was reading an exchange between a Western sex tourist and an owner of a brothel in Thailand. They're haggling over the price that feels like they're just, like I've been in some markets where you're kind of discussing the price of something, of an object. But it's not an object, it's a person. It's a precious young woman that they're haggling over the price of. And in the end, the Western sex tourist gets the brothel owner down to 785 Thai dollars, which by my calculations is about 18 quid. That's the valuation in this interaction of this precious girl, 18 quid. So I almost was going to have in my notes, like 18 quid is, that valuation of this young woman's life. But not even, because what he actually paid the 18 quid for was to sexually assault and treat this precious young woman as trash. Now, again, in my work on human trafficking, I'm often encountering a valuation of human worth that's absolutely gut-wrenching. But to mention something like this example, I actually think is something many of us can relate to on a personal level, and that so many of us, even in this room, let alone throughout our colleges and this university, have experienced personally sexual abuse, domestic abuse, partner violence, all manner of these expressions of someone devaluing and objectifying us. And if for any of us, and I'm certain there's many of us who've experienced such trauma, this question, whether we phrase it as philosophically as this or not, is what is a human life worth? What is my life worth? And so one of the philosophies that I myself have wrestled with throughout my life would be atheism and atheistic naturalism. And so that's going to be the beginning where we look at what does do I believe naturalism is telling us. So to do that, I've turned to Professor Yuval Noah Harari. Now, this is a globally renowned, best-selling author and professor. His book that I'm going to quote from is endorsed by President Obama and so many other very famous people, guys like Bill Gates and such. So his work is really influential. This isn't just like some hack job professor I found that's going to make me sound right. Rather, this is what he believes is right about human rights. Let's go to the quote. He says, "Human rights, just like God in heaven, are just a story that we've invented. They're not an objective reality. Take a human being, cut him open, look inside. You will find the heart, the kidneys, neurons, hormones, DNA, but you won't find any rights. The only place you find rights are in the stories that we have invented and spread around over the last few centuries. They may be very positive stories, very good stories, but they're still just fictional stories that we've invented." Now, this quotation really echoes what the speaker yesterday, Clover, was quoting of Richard Dawkins from Oxford, where these are atheistic natural materialists who believe that the only thing that is really a fact, the only thing that's really true in life is the physical matter. And so Professor Harari speaks about human rights as if they're a happy fiction. From my reading of his book, Sapiens, what I understand him to be saying is that for our species to have survived as long as we have, we would have had to believe that human rights are real in order to not self-destruct. So it makes sense that we've come to believe this. It's a happy fiction. It works for us in this context of evolution, but it really is just a fictional story. So in a sense, I feel that what he is saying is that human rights are something that might like resonate in our mind, but they really are just something in our mind. So if a friend was to disclose to you that they'd been sexually abused, a friend in college shares this with you, imagine that you start off empathetically and say like, "Hey, I'm so sorry. It was so wrong that that happened to you." And I subscribe to that happy fiction that like you matter and that your rights were violated. Essentially, it's, that view is saying that human rights exist so subjectively in our mind. And when you tell someone that what happened to them was wrong, but it's just in their, like it's only wrong in their mind, it's called gaslighting a victim. So my first point is that this view of naturalism that devalues victims, I think it lacks the undergirding, the rootedness we need to be able to say that what happened to you if you've been violated is truly, objectively, inherently wrong. Now, I want to acknowledge that some of my best friends at St. John's, in my college, some of the most philanthropic and charitable and inspiring people doing amazing advocacy subscribe to this view. When we've discussed human rights, we've discussed this stuff, and they just subscribe to this view. They say, it's a happy fiction, but I love it, and it works for me, and even though I don't really think that human rights are objectively true, I want to live my life like they are, and they're involved in great work. Now, I think this works when life is good. I think it works when you have the resources to contend for this and you have the strength to, but what about when you're the victim? What about when your life is crumbling? Or what if you're a member of parliament and your career's on the line, you feel your career's on the line, and you're afraid to actually stand up for those without a voice? It matters that we actually have a robust view of human rights, that human rights are real. Rachel Denhollander wrote a children's book as part of answering this question as to what is a girl worth. And I want to read to you a few of the pages from this beautiful picture book. She writes, "You are worth fighting for, worth standing alone for, worth whatever it takes for your worth to be shown. Your value is found not in what you can do or the things you accomplish and win. Your worth cannot fade. It will not go away. It is not changed a bit by what happens today. No one and nothing can make you worth less. No one and nothing can make you worth less." This is a beautiful view. I think we'd all be agree this is a beautiful view. But my question to you, is it true? And again, you might say, well, this works for me. I like this. It's my personal preference. And that all works again when life is going well. But you need to know what's true when life is punching you in the face or has completely betrayed you. Of a similar view is this. I got to give a talk on this topic in 2020, just before the lockdown, and it was in an art gallery, a beautiful art gallery that was displaying these beautiful paintings of real women in India. All the paintings were showing these women who were survivors of horrific violence, of ritual burns that scarred these women. And the painter was brilliant. He put gold primer underneath it so that any little chip or any cut in the paint would reveal the gold of the person. They have the same view that no one and nothing can make you worth less. No harm that's been done to you. No one can take that away or rob you of it. Now, I love this. To me, this is so much more beautiful than Harari's view. But my question to you is this true? What is a human life really worth? And to help answer that question, let's go to the victim impact statement by Rachel Denhollander. We'll pull that video up and play just 1 minute of it.
Throughout this process, I have clung to a quote by C.S. Lewis where he says, "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of unjust and just? A man does not call a line crooked unless he first has some idea of straight. What was I comparing the universe to when I called it unjust? Larry, I can call what you did evil and wicked because it was. And I know it was evil and wicked because the straight line exists. This straight line is not measured based on your perception or anyone else's perception. And this means I can speak the truth about my abuse without minimization or mitigation, and I can call it evil because I know what goodness is. And this is why I pity you. Because when a person loses the ability to define good and evil, when they cannot define evil, they can no longer define and enjoy what is truly good. When a person can...
So part of what Rachel's saying, and this is part of a beautiful 40-minute speech that is worth watching. And if you put it on 2x speed, it's just 20 minutes. YouTube is amazing. So she's saying that the fact that we can tell something is evil, she uses here the word crooked, but then she'll talk about evil. The fact that you can tell something is evil requires there to be something that is not evil, something that is good. And if good and evil are real categories, then there must be something real that separates them. We can call that a moral law. And where there's a moral law, we can look for a moral lawgiver. And so in this way, for us to be able to say that something is truly evil, that for someone to violate you in horrific ways, for human trafficking to truly be evil, it points us to the reality that there is a divine, that there is a moral lawgiver, that there is a God. So in this way, I think evil points to the divine. In my own life, as I've wrestled with whether or not Christianity is true, I've, like many of you, struggled with, if there's a good and powerful God, how come there's evil? But over time, as I've looked more closely and carefully at this, I've come to believe that the reality of evil, for us to be able to say that something is heart-wrenching and evil, that actually requires us to see that there's a beautiful divinity. And this is the view of Rachel. This is the view of the painter who painted those beautiful images of these women. And this is the view that I subscribe to. The view that they are speaking of isn't just like a new concept, but it's an ancient biblical one. It's an idea that there is this beautiful and magnificent good God who's created not only the galaxies and the stars and the beautiful ocean beaches, but that the masterpiece that he made of all of that was actually humankind. That there's a way that we are made in God's image. And so that means when someone violates another person, they're violating something sacred. So much so that Jesus says in one of the eyewitness accounts of what his words and deeds were, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, whatever you do, however you treat the most marginal, powerless person, it's like you're doing it to me. God takes it so personally that he's saying that whatever we do to the person that most of society doesn't even recognize, the person that we don't even see as we walk past them on our way to our lectures or supervisions, that God actually cares so much about them that we get to treat God by the way that we interact with this person. The Bible tells us that God not only has a heart that breaks for the broken, but that he was so loving them that he entered into history, real history that we can observe, like we do with my history degree, those tools of history, looking for primary sources, looking for eyewitnesses, looking for hostile and unlikely sources. We can use the tools of history, the tools of investigation, and look for whether or not that's happened. The Bible tells us that Jesus is God entered into history, that the divine, the most powerful being of all of reality, died on a cross to rescue us. So these are the words of another eyewitness account who recorded these words of Jesus, who says famously in John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son, Jesus, into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. And one of the things that in my victims advocacy work I found so beautiful about Jesus is that in his resurrected, triumphant body, where he's conquered death, he's conquered the brokenness and pain of the human condition, I would have expected the resurrected God to look like Zeus, completely like just impenetrable, magnificent. But instead, he shows his followers, eyewitnesses, the scars from the cross. That even in victory, God bears the scars of human suffering and evil, so that for every one of us who lives life with a limp or pain, we can see the cost that Jesus gave for us, his very own divine life. That if the worth of what something, if the value of something is found in what someone will pay for it, then the Bible's description of what we are worth, God's evaluation of us, is that you are worth infinity, worth the very divine. And that is identity. That is a value that has meant in my life when life has hurt so much, when there's moments of my life, my wife and my life, where just everything seems to be slipping through our fingers, and we feel crushed, that we can know that we're holding on to that value, that we are so precious to him. It means that you can go through your exams and maybe you'll get that first you're aiming for, and yet you're not going to feel that your value is tied up to it. It means that you can live and dare and dream and risk and fail and win, and you're not being tossed by how you're doing that day. It also means that you can join Jesus in being a light that shines in the darkness. That's not just all about you. This isn't some Christian humanist vision about how humans are the best, but rather that we get to join the divine, join God in bringing light and hope and healing to this broken world. It's absolutely amazing. It's changed my life, and I want you to have that same experience. I remember the moment that Marika and I came around Lee's Corner, the bus station, in the blistering, snowy cold, and my eyes, by a miracle of miracle, met Danielle's. I remember her seeing me and just running, this little girl running through the snow. She's in shorts and a t-shirt, for real, and just threw herself into my arms. And in that moment, I felt two things. One, her shivering little body, and also this magnificent sense of she was safe. And honestly, that's been my own experience with life, in my own lostness and vulnerability, and coming to see that I can know so much about God by studying him and studying the Bible, but also by getting to know him personally. I want you to have that too. I'm not saying that you should have that just based on my 20-minute talk, but I would encourage you to investigate it, to go and study it, to see if this God is true, to go and read the Bible yourself and see, are these words really the words of the divine? Because again, if the value of something is what someone will pay for it, then if this is true, the value of your life is found in the scars of Jesus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. We're going to have a quick time of discussion. If you don't know where to start, you can start with the question, what is human life worth? So yeah, have a talk amongst your tables, and then we'll come back in a few minutes, which we're going to work out. And for a Q&A. Oh, and there's going to be a QR code that is going to come up on the screen. In that time, it would be good if you could, if you had a question, if you could go to that QR code and put in a question, and then we can discuss. Great, thank you. Great. Let's start bringing conversations to a close. And yeah. Great. There's quite a few questions now. I'll start. I'm going to start mainly with those with more upvotes and then head down. So the first question, Daniel, can consent and humanism not be enough for human rights?
Can consent and humanism not be enough? We're asking, can they be enough for human rights? I think is what you're asking. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I think that in a sense, you're just going one step forward, where you're going to the application of how we consider what is appropriate behavior or not, or how the law should be. So, like consent, if we're talking about sex, that sexual abuse is sexual activity that doesn't have consent. So can we not just agree on that we have a law that says wherever there's not consent and there's like sexual activity, we deem that violence and is a breaking of the law. Yeah, I think that works as a law for sure. But my question, as I'm working all around the world with people who are wrestling over what the law should be, and there are really people who don't think the laws should be reflecting consent in different parts of the world, and even in every part of the world, there are people who live their life showing that that's what they think. Therefore, I think that it's really important that we have a thicker, a deeper view of understanding of why consent matters. And so if you look at the quotation Clover showed of Professor Richard Dawkins yesterday, or even Professor Harari I showed you today, I don't think these gentlemen can really make a distinction between what is happening when a leaf is trampled and a human being is being crushed. It's just organic matter. Was there any real difference between my little girl Miriam looking for her lost toy and me looking for Danielle? I mean, both are things and they're both precious to us. I submit to you that there is a difference, and that for us to be able to answer that question, we need something thicker and deeper and richer than what these atheist naturalists offer us.
Thank you. And following on from that, can people believe in objective human rights without the divine?
Yeah, one of my best friends in college is doing his PhD, arguing that human rights, that morals even, are facts. He was at my home the other day having tea. Neither of us are British, but we're acting like it, So we're having tea, and we're discussing. So I was asking him, do you find a lot of people who agree with you are religious? And he shared with me that, yes, a lot of people who agree with him are religious. He's so fun. The first time he was explaining his PhD to me, he said, you know what, my PhD is trying to argue that postmodern relativism doesn't work. Because for the person that says everything is relative, can't they not hear that that statement isn't relative? Or if they say nothing is true, like if nothing is true, then it's true that there's nothing's true, therefore there's truth, therefore it self-defeats. I'm like, my guy, I totally agree with you. And so similarly, he thinks that things like that sexual abuse is wrong, that human trafficking is wrong, that domestic violence is wrong, that he recognizes that these things aren't relative, but they're true. But when I push him a little further to go, how do you know they're true? Why are they true? Why is Yuval Noah Harari's view wrong? I haven't heard him be able to answer that. And so, yes, people definitely believe that human rights are objective, and they don't believe in the divine, but I don't think they're providing like a deep enough or rational reason for it in a way I think the Bible beautifully answers.
Yeah, there's quite a long question here, but it says, I understand what you mean, that I have worth, but I still feel very low and helpless. How do I begin to live life truly embracing that I am worthy fighting for?
Well, first, thank you for asking this question. It's a really vulnerable and very relatable question. When I say relatable, you might feel like you're the only person in this room that feels this way. I promise you, you're not. So many people, so many of us feel the sense of unworthiness, the sense of emptiness and hopelessness. And so you're very much not alone. One of the places that feels so haunting to feel that is actually when you're surrounded by people and you feel like you should just be feeling happy among friends, and you still feel empty. So I'll give you a short answer and a long answer. The short answer would be to reach out to someone that you trust and can share more about how you're doing and invite their honest input. There are times where I feel so low, and I'm able to reach out to my wife, I can reach out to my pastor and be able to talk with them, and they're able to remind me of something. C.S. Lewis is attributed as saying, was a professor at Oxford and Cambridge. I don't think he actually said this, but I love whoever paraphrased them or made this up, okay? They said, a friend is someone who sings the song of your heart when you have forgotten it. And there's a sense to which my wife is my best friend. And when I am feeling vulnerable and empty, she's able to speak to me of my worth and value. And she's able to ground that, as she does every day, in who Jesus is and in what that means for me. So she's an amazing friend. But an even better friend than my wife, my best friend, as trite as it might sound, is honestly Jesus. And I'm able to hear his voice as I read his words in the Bible. And so I would encourage you, if you're not already reading the Bible, to begin reading the Bible and being able to let him sing the song of who you are to you. But maybe you're someone actually who's helping run Kick U and you're totally involved in Christian stuff and you love the Bible and you still feel this way. Tomorrow, that was my short answer. My longer answer is going to come tomorrow, same time, same place. I was asked to speak on, is our pursuit of happiness making us sad? And I'm going to try to tackle this a little more robustly then. But there's so much more I want to say. We'll just save it for tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you very much. There are definitely loads of moments within the Gospels where Jesus embraces those who are feeling low and hopeless. And there is hope found in that. You talked a bit about the US Constitution in the start of your talk. How do you justify an infinite worth when it comes to policy making?
Well, for here, I got to draw my boy, Jürgen Habermas. For those of us who've been inflicted with having to read his many, 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 many words, it's a style of writing in Germany, okay? They all have to write many, many words, and I think in order to get their PhD, okay? Most of those big books were originally someone's PhD. So in his book from a long time ago, where he put forward the concept of the public sphere, he talks about how each of us will have various reasons that we believe something is good policy, and that might be a private reason, and that might not be the same reason that we put into our speech or our persuasive essay for why we are arguing for something to exist. So for example, my PhD is on William Wilberforce and his campaign to end the slave trade. Now, a lot of William Wilberforce's magnificent championing for the enslaved for the slave trade to be ended flowed from his Christian worldview. When he was at John's, I've gone to our old library at John's, and I'm like, oh man, Wilberforce studied here. I guarantee you he didn't, because though the library was there during his time and those books were there, the boy was a self-centered party animal. He wasn't studying. The only room I know for sure Wilberforce was our formal dining hall, because he loved formals and drink and everything, okay? So that's the kind of guy William Wilberforce was 200 years ago at St. John's. And then all of a sudden he becomes one of the most famous human rights activists that the UK and the world has ever known. And the difference for him was, as he came to have a personal relationship with God, he came to love Jesus. So from a policymaking perspective, privately, Wilberforce is animated by a love for Jesus, and he becomes so selfless, beautiful. From a policy perspective, you don't see a lot of that in his speeches, because he's trying to convince people who don't care at all about God or human rights that they should abolish the slave trade. So instead, he uses all these economic arguments, saying, oh, this will be good for Britain's economy. I genuinely, having read his private journals, don't believe that Wilberforce cared that much about the British economy. He really cared about the value of these people and wanted to use whatever rhetorical devices he needed. So I don't know that when I'm doing policy making, I'm talking about infinite worth necessarily. Though there might be words I use, like when I'm writing speeches for these members of parliament, like human dignity and such. But yeah, if you're asking, do we need to talk about that in a policy level, I think I agree with Jürgen Habermas, no.
Great, thank you. I think we may have time for one more question, and there are loads still on there. So there will be time at the end if you want to chat with Daniel, he'll stick around. But the final question, which has got a lot of votes, is, can you explain how Jesus' scars reveal human worth?
Can I explain how Jesus' scars reveal human worth? If my opening speech didn't, then my answer is no. No, that's what everything I'm trying to say today is to answer the question how Jesus' scars reveal human worth. Just put very simply, I think using economic terms, the value that we economically would see that something has is what someone will pay for it. So when I was a child, a home was worth something, and now it's worth a lot more, which is why people our age can't buy a home. Um, in terms of the fact that Jesus counted every single one of us, those who believe in him and follow him, and those who don't even think he exists. Those who think he's a beautiful fairy tale, and those who think that Christianity and religion are what's wrong with the world. The Bible tells us that Jesus died for all of us. And if Jesus is divine, then that is saying that the value that the divine will pay for us, that the divine will give for us, is the infinite worth of Jesus, the beloved, the divine. There's a page in the Bible that I just find so beautiful where Paul, he's one of the followers of Jesus that helped write the Bible, he is writing to a bunch of people in the city of Colossae. And he's writing to these people and he's saying, guys, you're being so toxic. It's disturbing. You need to stop. Put these things, these toxic behaviors away. Stop it. And before they even had a chance to turn the page, before they've even been able to move on to the next chapter of his work, in that very same page, he says to these people who are so toxic, people just like us, and he says, as God's holy, chosen, and beloved. Those three words are so beautiful, and they apply to us, to any of us who will receive it. The word beloved means more than just loved, but actually delighted in and liked. So like, imagine you have a kid, and they are just the worst, okay? They go to Oxford, okay? They make bad decisions, yeah? And you still love them, but you find them so annoying, yeah? So you love them, but they're not necessarily beloved right now. You don't really enjoy being with them. The word beloved means loved and delighted and loved and liked. And that's the word that to these people who are not perfect, that Paul says that in Christ, we're beloved. God delights and likes you. A chosen. It's not like that God's just stuck with those games where you move the lever and the claw and it picks up a random toy. That's not how this works with God. He didn't randomly, okay, I'm stuck with Caleb. No, he chose you. He loves you. Okay? And then first, holy. The word holy for some of us might seem like it simply means very moral, but it actually means created for noble purpose, set apart for noble use. Some of you are old enough to remember when the Marvel films were a big thing, yeah? And Thor has a hammer, and it's not a hammer that he uses to put in a calendar on the wall. He has a hammer that he uses to vanquish enemies. And the Bible is telling us that God has made every one of us to be holy to him, that he's created us for noble purpose. That Thor's hammer is holy to Thor, and you and I were made to be holy to God. God made you for a purpose. You were made to make a difference. It's so precious. The fact that Jesus, the divine, is willing, that he received those scars through the death of not only the cross, but of the Bible tells us that he received the fullness of the brokenness of all reality in himself, that you would be redeemed. That you, though you came into this world not believing in God, not being a friend of God, might be not only his friend, but his child. That home is found in God, is the price that Jesus will pay for you. And so in that way, when I think of the scars, the death of Jesus, I think of how much every human being is worth to him, and therefore how much you are worth to him, and therefore how we're to treat everybody. Well, thank you so much. I hope to see you tomorrow, 1 o'clock, free lunch.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for giving up your time to give that talk. There are many different ways to respond to this talk, and I know there was loads of questions that we didn't quite get to, but in the weeks following, we will be running what's called continuing conversations, and there's a leaflet for that on your tables that you can have a look at. Equally, there are also forms that you can fill out. If there are any questions or thoughts that you had, you can write them down, and we can get back to you via email or something. Yes, and before you go, please take a look at the books at the back. There are lots that we're giving away for free. And there's one particular book called Can We Trust the Gospels that we don't have loads in stock of. But if you want to receive a book of that, you can put your name down, and we can bring you a copy when we get more in. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Sorry that we've run over it, but yeah, thank you very much.